The dust cloud rising behind the wagon train had long since settled when Beatrice Vaughn realized they weren't coming back for her. She stood in the middle of the vast Oklahoma prairie, her traveling dress stained with dirt and sweat, watching the last speck of white canvas disappear over the distant ridge. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small bundle of possessions she'd managed to grab before the wagon master had dumped her belongings onto the ground with all the ceremony of discarding trash. "This is what happens when you can't pay your way," he'd said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "We're not a charity, Miss Vaughn." The fact that her money had been stolen 3 nights prior seemed to matter little to him. The fact that she was a 22-year-old woman alone in Indian Territory mattered even less. Rules were rules, he'd said, and the other families had their own troubles without taking on hers. So here she stood, miles from anywhere, with nothing but the clothes on her back, a carpet bag containing 2 dresses and her mother's Bible, and the sinking realization that she might very well die out here. The Oklahoma sky stretched endlessly overhead, a brilliant blue that seemed to mock her predicament with its beauty. The year was 1874, and she'd been on her way to California to meet a man she'd been corresponding with for 6 months, a shopkeeper who needed a wife. Now that dream seemed as distant as the stars. Beatrice turned in a slow circle, trying to assess her situation with the practical mind her father had instilled in her before his death 2 years prior. To the east, nothing but rolling grassland. To the west, the same. North and south offered no better prospects. She had no horse, no weapon, no food save for a single biscuit wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her bag. She had water in a canteen, but even that would last only a day or 2 in this heat. She was just trying to decide which direction might offer the best chance of stumbling upon civilization when she heard it. The sound of hooves, moving fast, coming from the south. Her heart leaped with hope, then immediately constricted with fear. Out here, a rider could just as easily be a threat as salvation. The horse crested a small rise, and Beatrice saw him clearly. A man on a paint horse, sitting tall in the saddle, his brown hat pulled low against the sun. He rode with the easy confidence of someone born to it, and as he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair visible beneath his hat, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He wore a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark trousers, and scuffed leather boots. A rifle rested in a scabbard on his saddle, and a revolver hung at his hip. He slowed as he approached, his eyes scanning her, then the scattered belongings around her feet, then the empty horizon where the wagon train had disappeared. His expression was hard to read, but something in his green eyes softened as they returned to her face. "You're a long way from anywhere to be standing alone," he said, his voice deep and carrying a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. "I'm aware of that," Beatrice replied, lifting her chin despite the fear coursing through her veins. Her mother had always said she had too much pride for her own good, but right now, it was all she had left. The man dismounted with fluid grace, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He was tall, she noted, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked hard for a living. He removed his hat, revealing sweat-dampened hair, and held it respectfully against his chest. "Name's Kade Sullivan," he said. "I'm a rancher about 15 miles south of here. I was heading into Muskogee when I saw the wagon train pass. Seemed like they were moving awful fast, like maybe they were running from something. Then I saw the dust here and figured I'd better check it out." "Beatrice Vaughn," she replied. And they weren't running from anything except the responsibility of helping someone in need. Kade's eyes narrowed slightly. They left you behind on purpose. I couldn't pay. The words tasted bitter. My money was stolen, and the wagon master said he couldn't afford to carry passengers who didn't contribute. She watched Kade's jaw tighten, a muscle jumping in his cheek. That's low, even for someone like Harvey Benson. He's got a reputation for being hard, but this. He shook his head, then seemed to come to a decision. You're coming with me. Beatrice blinked. Excuse me. You can't stay out here. Even if you started walking now, you'd never make it to Muskogee before nightfall, and you sure as hell don't want to be out here after dark. Comanches sometimes come through these parts, and even if you avoid them, there are wolves and other dangers. He gestured to his horse. I've got a ranch. It's not fancy, but my sister lives there too. You can stay with us until we figure out what to do with you. The casual way he said, "What to do with you," might have offended her if she'd had any other options. As it was, she found herself pathetically grateful for his offer, even as her practical side warned her about accepting help from strange men in the middle of nowhere. How do I know I can trust you? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Kade met her eyes steadily. You don't, but I'm giving you my word as a Christian man that I mean you no harm. My sister's name is Lily. She's 17 and sharp as a tack. She'll vouch for me being decent enough, though she'd probably also tell you I'm stubborn as a mule and too serious for my own good. A hint of a smile touched his lips. But I've never left a soul in need if I could help it, and I'm not about to start now. Beatrice studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ill intent. What she saw instead was a kind of weary honesty, the look of a man who'd seen enough of the world to know its cruelties, but still tried to do right by it. She thought of her father, who'd always taught her to trust her instincts about people. Right now, every instinct she had was screaming that Kade Sullivan was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man offering help to someone who desperately needed it. All right, she said. Thank you. Kade nodded and moved to gather her scattered belongings. He tied her carpet bag to his saddle, then turned back to her. You ever ridden a horse before? A few times, but not recently. Well, we'll take it slow. You'll ride behind me and hold on. The ranch isn't too far, but the ground's uneven in places. He swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. Put your foot on mine and I'll pull you up. Beatrice hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip strong and steady as he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. She settled behind him on the horse, acutely aware of how close they were, how she had no choice but to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling. Hold tight, he said, and she felt the words rumble through his chest. As they started moving, Beatrice pressed her cheek against his back, feeling the heat of him through his shirt and the steady rhythm of his breathing. She was exhausted, she realized, the terror and despair of the past hours finally catching up with her. The rocking motion of the horse and the security of being no longer alone worked on her like a sleeping draft, and despite her best efforts to remain alert, her eyes began to drift closed. You can rest if you need to, Kade said, his voice gentle. I've got you. And somehow, despite everything, Beatrice believed him. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, Kade was saying her name softly, telling her they were almost there. She blinked awake to find the sun lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Ahead of them, she could see buildings. A ranch house constructed of wood and stone, a large barn, several smaller outbuildings and corrals containing horses and cattle. As they rode into the yard, a young woman emerged from the house, shielding her eyes against the sun. She was pretty, with long dark hair pulled back in a braid and the same green eyes as her brother. She wore a simple calico dress and an apron, and her expression shifted from curious to concerned as she took in the sight of Beatrice on the horse behind Kade. "Kade, what happened? Who is this?" "Her name's Beatrice Vaughn," Kade said, dismounting and then helping Beatrice down. Her legs were unsteady after the long ride, and she might have fallen if he hadn't kept a hand on her elbow. "The wagon train left her behind. She needs a place to stay." Lily's eyes widened with indignation. "They left her, out here alone." She moved forward immediately, taking Beatrice's other arm. "You poor thing. Come inside, please. You must be exhausted and hungry." The kindness in her voice nearly undid Beatrice's composure. She'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, but now, faced with genuine compassion, she felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, unwilling to break down in front of these strangers who were already doing so much for her. The ranch house was simple but well kept, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a fireplace built of river stone, and handmade furniture that showed care in its construction. Lily settled Beatrice into a chair at the wooden table while Kade brought in her carpet bag. "I'll see to the horse and the evening feeding," he said. "Lily, maybe you could fix her something to eat." "Already on it," Lily replied, moving to the stove where a pot of something savory smelling was simmering. "And I'll heat water for a bath too." "I bet you'd like to wash the trail dust off, wouldn't you, Miss Vaughn?" "Beatrice, please," she managed. "And yes, that would be wonderful, but I don't want to be a burden." "Nonsense." Lily ladled stew into a bowl and set it before Beatrice along with a thick slice of bread. "We don't get much company out here. It's nice to have another woman to talk to. Don't get me wrong, I love my brother, but he's not much for conversation about anything that doesn't involve cattle or horses." Despite everything, Beatrice felt a small smile tug at her lips. She picked up the spoon and tasted the stew. It was delicious, rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned perfectly. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite, and then she had to force herself to eat slowly rather than wolfing it down like a starving animal. Lily busied herself heating water and chattering about the ranch, clearly trying to put Beatrice at ease. She learned that Kade and Lily had come to Oklahoma 3 years ago, after their parents died of fever back in Texas. Kade had worked as a ranch hand to save enough money to buy this land, and together they'd built it up from nothing. It was a hard life, Lily admitted, but a good one. They had dreams of expanding, of building the ranch into something that could support families for generations to come. "Kade works so hard," Lily said, a note of pride in her voice. "He's up before dawn and rarely stops until after dark. Sometimes I worry he'll work himself into an early grave, but he says we've got to build something solid while we're young enough to do it." Beatrice listened, filing away these details about the man who'd rescued her. Kade Sullivan was starting to form a fuller picture in her mind. A man who'd taken on responsibility young, who worked hard, who cared for his sister and had dreams bigger than his current circumstances. It was admirable, she thought, and dangerous for her peace of mind, because she couldn't afford to develop feelings for someone when her situation was so precarious. After she'd eaten, Lily showed her to a small room off the main house. It was clearly Lily's room, and Beatrice protested, but the younger woman wouldn't hear of it. "You'll sleep here tonight, and I'll bunk in with Kade. There's a spare bed in his room, though he'll grumble about it." Lily grinned. "Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent if you're staying a while." The bath was heaven, even though Beatrice had to make do with a large basin rather than a proper tub. She scrubbed the dust and sweat from her skin, washed her hair, and put on the cleaner of her 2 dresses. When she emerged, feeling more human than she had in days, She found Kade had returned and was sitting at the table, going over what looked like account books by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in her appearance. She'd braided her dark hair over one shoulder, and the dress, though simple, fit her well. She saw his gaze linger for just a moment before he seemed to catch himself and looked back down at his books. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much. Thank you again for your hospitality, both of you." Beatrice took a seat across from him, clasping her hands on the table. "I should tell you my plans, such as they are. I was heading to California to marry a man I've been corresponding with, a shopkeeper named William Hartley. He's expecting me in 2 months' time. Obviously, I've missed the wagon train, but perhaps I can find work in Muskogee and save enough to join another train heading west in the spring." Kade's expression was carefully neutral. "That's one option, though work for women in Muskogee is limited. There's the hotel, or you might find a family needing a governess or housekeeper." "I can teach," Beatrice offered. "I've had a good education. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, even some Latin and French." "The town doesn't have a proper school yet," Kade said. "But some of the families might pay for private lessons for their children. That's something to consider." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "But there's another option if you're willing. We could use help here at the ranch. Lily does her best, but there's more work than 2 people can handle, especially as we're trying to expand. We could offer you room and board plus a small wage. It wouldn't be much, but you could save it toward your passage to California." Beatrice's heart jumped at the offer. Working on a ranch with Kade Sullivan, seeing him every day, living under the same roof even with Lily as a chaperone, it felt both like an answer to a prayer and a test of her resolve. "I don't know anything about ranching," she admitted. "Lily didn't either when we started. She learned." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, we need help with more than just cattle. Cooking, mending, keeping the house, helping with the garden. There's plenty to do that doesn't require you to rope a steer." Lily emerged from Kade's room at that moment, having apparently been listening. "Oh, please say yes, Beatrice. It would be wonderful to have help, and even better to have another woman around. Just until you've saved enough for California, of course." Beatrice looked between them, these 2 kind strangers who'd taken her in without question. The sensible thing would be to go to Muskogee, to put distance between herself and the undeniable attraction she felt toward Kade Sullivan. But sense had never been her strongest quality, her mother used to say. And the truth was, she had nowhere else to go and no better options presenting themselves. "All right," she said. "I'll work for you until I can afford passage west. Thank you. I promise I'll work hard and earn my keep." "I don't doubt it," Kade said, and the warmth in his voice sent a flutter through her chest that she firmly told herself to ignore. That first night, Beatrice lay in Lily's bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. She thought about William Hartley waiting for her in California, a man she knew only through carefully composed letters. She thought about the wagon train that had abandoned her. And mostly, she thought about Kade Sullivan, about the way his hand had felt in hers when he pulled her onto his horse, about the solid warmth of his back as she'd clung to him during the ride. She was being foolish, she told herself. She'd known the man for less than a day. But there was something about him, something in his steady gaze and quiet strength that called to something deep within her. She'd felt it the moment their eyes met, a recognition that defied logic or reason. With a sigh, Beatrice rolled onto her side and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring work and the challenge of learning to navigate this new life. She'd think about Kade Sullivan and her inconvenient feelings for him later. Much later, when she had the luxury of time and security to examine such things. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely satisfying. Beatrice rose before dawn with Lily, learning to cook the hearty meals that fueled a rancher's day. She discovered she had a knack for bread making, and took pride in the way Kade's eyes lit up when he bit into a fresh roll at dinner. She mended torn shirts and pants, her needle flying with the skill her mother had taught her. She helped Lily in the garden, learning to distinguish between weeds and the vegetables they were growing for winter stores. Kade was a constant presence, though he spent most of his time outside with the cattle and horses. Beatrice found herself watching for him, her heart lifting when she saw him ride in from the range, his hat pushed back and his face weathered from sun and wind. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was always something worth hearing. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and a kindness in how he treated both his sister and the animals in his care that spoke to his character. In the evenings, after the work was done, the three of them would sit around the table and talk. Kade would tell stories about his day, about the ornery bull who kept breaking through fences or the new colt who showed promise as a cutting horse. Lily would share gossip from her occasional trips to town, about which families were feuding and which young men were courting which young ladies. And Beatrice would tell them about her life back in Missouri, about her father who'd been a school teacher and her mother who'd played piano in the church. "Why were you heading to California to marry a stranger?" Kade asked one evening, about 2 weeks after Beatrice's arrival. It was the first time he'd asked her anything truly personal, and the question hung in the air between them. Beatrice took a sip of her coffee, considering her answer. "After my parents died, I was alone. No siblings, no close family. I tried to make it on my own, but it's hard for a woman without means or connections. When William's advertisement appeared in the newspaper, seeking an educated wife to help him run his shop, it seemed like a practical solution. We corresponded, and he seemed like a decent man. Kind, hardworking, respectable. But you didn't love him," Lily said softly. "It wasn't a question." "No," Beatrice admitted. "But I thought perhaps love would come, or at least respect and companionship. That seemed like enough." She felt Kade's eyes on her but didn't look up. She couldn't bear to see judgment there, or worse, pity. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. A person deserves more than just enough. They deserve to be with someone who makes them feel alive, who sees them for who they really are and loves them anyway. Settling for less than that seems like a kind of slow dying. Beatrice did look at him then, and found his green eyes watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken things. Lily cleared her throat loudly, breaking the spell. "Well, I for one think it's lucky the wagon train left you behind, Beatrice. Otherwise, we never would have met you, and you never would have discovered that you make better biscuits than anyone in the Oklahoma Territory." The moment passed, but something had shifted between Beatrice and Kade. They were more careful around each other after that, as if both aware of the dangerous current flowing between them. They avoided being alone together, always making sure Lily was present. Their conversations became more formal, more guarded, but the attraction didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing day. Beatrice would catch Kade watching her as she worked in the garden, his expression unguarded for just a moment before he turned away. She knew he felt it too, this pull between them. And she knew, as he must know, that acting on it would be a mistake. She was saving money to go to California to a man who was expecting her. And Kade needed to focus on building his ranch, not getting entangled with a woman who was only passing through his life. A month after her arrival, everything changed. Beatrice was in the barn, collecting eggs from the hens who insisted on laying in the most inconvenient places, when she heard raised voices from outside. She set down her basket and moved to the barn door, peering out. 3 men on horses had ridden into the yard, and Kade was standing to meet them, his hand resting casually on his revolver. The men looked rough, with the hard eyes and worn clothes of drifters or worse. The one in the middle, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, was doing the talking. "We're just asking for some water and maybe a meal," he was saying, but his tone suggested it wasn't really a request. "We've been riding hard and our supplies are low." "There's a stream about 2 miles east," Kade replied, his voice calm but firm. "You can water your horses there. As for food, I'm afraid I can't help you. We're running low ourselves before the supply run to town." It was a lie. Beatrice knew they had plenty of food. Her heart began to pound as she realized the danger of the situation. The scarred man's expression hardened. "That's not very neighborly of you. Here we are, just asking for a little Christian charity, and you're turning us away." "I'm asking you politely to move on," Kade said, and now his voice had an edge to it. "This is private property and you're not welcome here." One of the other men, a wiry fellow with a nervous energy about him, suddenly pointed toward the barn. "There's a woman in there, Coulter. I saw her peeking out." Beatrice's blood ran cold. She stepped back into the shadows, but it was too late. The scarred man, Coulter, grinned in a way that made her skin crawl. "A woman, you say? Well, now that changes things. Maybe we could work out a trade, sometime with the lady in exchange for us riding peacefully on our way." Cade's hand moved to his gun with deadly intent. "You need to leave. Now. Before this turns into something you'll regret." 3 against 1 doesn't seem like good odds for you, friend," Coulter said, and his companions spread out slightly, hands moving toward their own weapons. Beatrice's mind raced. She knew Kade was fast. She'd seen him practice his draw, but 3 armed men was too many. She looked around the barn desperately for something, anything she could use to help. Her eyes landed on the hunting rifle Kade kept mounted on the wall for dealing with predators. She grabbed it, checked that it was loaded the way she'd seen Kade do, and moved back to the door. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady as she raised the rifle and aimed it at Coulter. "Actually, the odds are a bit better than you think," she called out, trying to keep her voice from trembling. All 4 men turned to look at her. Cade's eyes widened in alarm, but she kept her focus on Coulter. She had no idea if she could actually shoot a man, but she'd be damned if she let these drifters threaten the people who'd shown her nothing but kindness. "Well, well," Coulter said, though his smile had dimmed considerably. "The lady has some spirit. But I bet you've never fired that rifle in your life, sweetheart." "You'd be right," Beatrice admitted. "But at this distance, I don't think I could miss. And even if my first shot goes wide, my second or third probably won't. Are you willing to bet your life on it?" The standoff stretched for a long moment. Beatrice could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel sweat trickling down her back despite the cool autumn air. Then, finally, Coulter raised a hand to his men. "All right, we're going. No need for anyone to get shot over a meal and some water." He backed his horse up a few steps, his eyes moving between Kade and Beatrice. "But you folks might want to be more careful. Oklahoma Territory can be a dangerous place. Accidents happen to people who aren't properly neighborly." "I'll keep that in mind," Kade said coldly. "Now get off my land." The 3 men turned their horses and rode out, though not before Coulter shot one last look back at them that promised this wasn't over. Beatrice kept the rifle raised until they were out of sight, and only then did she lower it, her arms suddenly weak and shaking. Kade was at her side in an instant, taking the rifle from her trembling hands and setting it aside. "Are you all right?" Beatrice, look at me." She did, and found his face pale beneath his tan, his eyes dark with concern and something else she couldn't quite name. "I'm fine," she managed. "I just wanted to help." "That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish," he said, his hands gripping her shoulders. "You could have been killed. If any of them had drawn on you, if I hadn't been able to stop them in time. But they didn't, and you would have." She found herself swaying toward him, drawn by his warmth and strength, and the undeniable fact that she'd nearly lost him before she'd fully admitted to herself how much he meant to her. "Beatrice," he said, her name a whisper and a prayer, and then somehow the distance between them disappeared and he was kissing her. It was nothing like she'd imagined a first kiss would be. There was nothing gentle or tentative about it. It was desperate and fierce, born of fear and relief, and the feelings they'd been suppressing for weeks. His hands moved from her shoulders to cup her face, and she gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, wanting to crawl inside his skin and never let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. You're going to California to William Hartley, and I have no right to complicate things for you. What if I don't want to go to California?" The words were out before Beatrice could stop them, but once spoken, she realized they were true. "What if I want to stay here? With you?" Kade pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "You don't know what you're saying. You've only been here a month. You don't know me, not really. And ranch life is hard. Most days are nothing but work from sunup to sundown. There's no opera, no theater, no fine society. Just land and sky and cattle and the constant struggle to build something from nothing." "I don't care about any of that," Beatrice said fiercely. "I never did. All I ever wanted was a place to belong, people who needed me, work that mattered. And I've found that here, with you and Lily." She took a shaky breath. "Unless you don't want me to stay, unless that kiss didn't mean to you what it meant to me." "Didn't mean," Kade let out a rough laugh. "Beatrice, I've been half in love with you since the moment you stood in that empty prairie looking more angry than afraid, with your chin raised and fire in your eyes. Every day since has just made it worse. Watching you laugh at Lily's jokes, seeing how hard you work, the way you hum while you're cooking, how you're kind to every creature on this ranch from the horses down to the barn cats. I'm not half in love with you anymore. I'm all the way there, completely and irrevocably, and it's terrifying because I never expected to feel this way about anyone." Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes. "I love you too. I think I have since you pulled me onto your horse and told me you had me. I felt safer in that moment than I'd felt in years, and every day since has just proven that you're exactly the kind of man I always hoped existed, but never thought I'd find." This time when they kissed, it was slower, sweeter, a promise rather than a reaction to danger. When they parted, both of them were smiling, and Beatrice felt lighter than she had since before her parents died, as if some weight she'd been carrying had finally lifted. "So you'll stay?" Kade asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "You'll write to William Hartley and tell him you're not coming. You'll build a life here with me in the middle of nowhere, working yourself to the bone for a dream that might take years to fully realize." "Yes to all of it," Beatrice said. "On one condition. Name it. You marry me. Properly, with a preacher and witnesses and all the legal documents. I won't stay here as your hired help or even as your sweetheart. If I'm going to build a life with you, I want it to be as your wife." Kade's smile widened into something that could only be called a grin, transforming his usually serious face. "Beatrice Vaughn, are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am. Is that scandalous?" "Probably. But then again, You did threaten 3 armed men with a rifle you'd never fired before, so I'm starting to think scandalous might be your natural state." He kissed her again, quick and hard. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I'll ride into Muskogee tomorrow and talk to Reverend Matthews. We can be married by the end of the week if you're willing." The end of the week seems perfect. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms until Lily's voice called out from the house. "Is it safe? Are they gone? And why are you two hugging in the barn?" Kade and Beatrice broke apart, both laughing. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go tell my sister that she's about to gain a sister-in-law, and then I need to check that those men are really gone and make sure they're not circling back." "You think they will?" Beatrice asked, worry creeping back in. "I don't know, but I'm going to ride into Muskogee tonight and talk to the sheriff. Coulter and his men match the description of some outlaws who have been causing trouble over in Kansas. The law might want to know they're in the area." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Beatrice felt a contentment she'd never known before. Yes, there were threats and challenges ahead. Yes, ranch life would be hard. But she'd faced down armed men to protect the man she loved, and she'd stand by his side through whatever else came their way. Lily took the news of their engagement with a shriek of joy that probably scared every cow within a mile radius. She hugged Beatrice so hard it nearly cracked her ribs, then turned and hugged her brother with equal enthusiasm. "I knew it," she crowed. "I told you, Kay, didn't I tell you? From the moment you brought her home, I knew you two were meant for each other." "You're a menace," Kade told his sister fondly, "and you're going to be impossible to live with now that you get to say I told you so." "You're absolutely right," Lily agreed cheerfully. "Oh, Beatrice, we're going to be sisters. This is the best thing that's happened since we came to Oklahoma. We need to plan the wedding. What will you wear? We'll need flowers and food for after the ceremony. Do you think we should have a party at the ranch or keep it simple?" "I think simple sounds perfect," Beatrice said, smiling at the younger woman's enthusiasm. "I don't need anything fancy. Just Kade, a preacher, and the people we care about." "I'll ride into Muskogee tonight," Kade said, his expression turning more serious. "I'll talk to the sheriff about Coulter and his men, and I'll speak to Reverend Matthews about the wedding. Lily, while I'm gone, you two stay inside with the doors and windows locked. Take the rifle and the revolver. If anyone comes around, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand?" "You think they might come back tonight?" Lily asked, her excitement fading into concern. "I think they might try something when they think I'm not here. That's why I'm going to make a show of riding out toward Muskogee, but then I'm going to circle back and keep watch from the ridge. If they show up, I'll be ready." "That's dangerous," Beatrice protested. "If there are 3 of them and you're alone, I won't engage unless I have to. If they show up, I'll fire a warning shot to scare them off and to alert you two to barricade yourselves in. Then I'll ride hard for Muskogee and get the sheriff. But I have to know you're safe before I can leave you overnight." Kade cupped Beatrice's face in his hands. "I just found you. I'm not going to lose you to some outlaws looking for easy prey." In the end, Beatrice and Lily spent a tense evening huddled in the house while Kade made his elaborate show of riding toward Muskogee. They kept the lamps low and the weapons close, jumping at every sound. But the night passed without incident, and when dawn broke, Kade rode back in, tired but unharmed. "Nothing," he reported. "Either they moved on or they're planning something for later. Either way, I'm going to Muskogee this morning for real. I'll be back before nightfall." He was true to his word, returning late that afternoon with news. The sheriff knew of Coulter and his gang. They were wanted for robbery and assault in 3 territories. A posse was being formed to track them down, and the sheriff had asked Kade to join them. "I told him I would," Kade said, ignoring Beatrice's sharp intake of breath. But not until after the wedding. Reverend Matthews said he can perform the ceremony this Saturday. That gives us 4 days. 4 days until we're married, and then you're riding off to chase down dangerous outlaws. Beatrice tried to keep the fear from her voice but failed. Kade, that's not a very auspicious start to a marriage. I know, but these men threatened you, threatened our home, and they'll threaten other people if they're not stopped. I have to help. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I'll be careful, I promise, and I'll come back to you. Nothing on this earth could keep me from coming back to you. The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparation. Lily threw herself into wedding planning with the fervor of a general planning a military campaign. She enlisted the help of several women from nearby ranches, and soon the small ranch house was filled with the smell of baking and the chatter of friendly voices. Beatrice wrote a difficult letter to William Hartley, explaining that circumstances had changed and she would not be coming to California. She tried to be honest without being cruel, thanking him for his correspondence and wishing him well in finding a wife who could give him the life he deserved. It felt like closing a door on one future and stepping fully into another, and while there was some sadness in it, there was also relief and excitement. On Saturday morning, Beatrice woke in Lily's bed for the last time. The next time she slept, it would be as Kade's wife, in the room they would share together. The thought made her nervous and excited in equal measure. Lily had worked a small miracle with Beatrice's limited wardrobe, altering her best dress with lace borrowed from one neighbor and ribbons from another. When Beatrice looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant style, with small wildflowers woven through it. The dress fit her perfectly, highlighting the curves she'd developed from weeks of good food and hard work. But more than that, she glowed. There was no other word for it. She looked like a woman in love, and she supposed she was. The wedding took place in the small church in Muskogee, with Reverend Matthews presiding. The church was simple, just wooden pews and whitewashed walls, but it was filled with people. Lily had invited everyone within riding distance, and they'd come, curious to meet the woman who'd captured the heart of the serious young rancher who kept mostly to himself. Beatrice stood at the back of the church, her hand resting on Lily's arm since she had no father to walk her down the aisle, and looked at Kade waiting for her at the altar. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, wearing a black suit that made him look both strange and wonderful. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and when his eyes met hers, the love in them nearly stole her breath. The ceremony itself passed in a haze. Beatrice heard herself making vows, felt Kade sliding a simple gold band onto her finger, and then the Reverend was pronouncing them man and wife, and Kade was kissing her to the applause and cheers of the assembled guests. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard laden with food that the neighboring families had contributed. There was music, a local man playing fiddle while couples danced in the fading light. Kade, who claimed he couldn't dance, proved himself a liar by sweeping Beatrice into a waltz that left her breathless and laughing. "You're full of surprises, Kade Sullivan," she told him. "That's Kade Sullivan Vaughn to you now, wife," he replied with a grin that was becoming more frequent the longer she knew him. "We're in this together, remember, your name and mine joined for life." As the sun set and the stars came out, the guests began to depart, offering congratulations and well wishes. Lily discreetly disappeared to spend the night with a neighboring family, giving the newlyweds their privacy. And then, finally, Beatrice and Kade were alone. They stood in the main room of the ranch house, suddenly awkward with each other despite the vows they'd just exchanged. Kade reached out and gently pulled the flowers from Beatrice's hair, setting them aside with care. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "A little," she admitted. "Are you?" "Terrified," he smiled. "But also the happiest I've ever been. Beatrice Sullivan, my wife. I keep saying it in my head and it still doesn't seem real. It's real." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat strong and steady beneath her palm. "This is real. We're real. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Kade swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the bedroom they would now share. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." The next morning, Beatrice woke wrapped in her husband's arms, feeling more complete than she'd ever thought possible. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting everything in gold, and she could hear the sounds of the ranch waking up outside. Cattle lowing, horses whinnying, birds singing their morning songs. "Good morning, wife," Kade murmured against her hair. "Good morning, husband." She turned in his arms to face him. "How long do we have before you leave with the posse?" His expression clouded. "They're meeting tomorrow at dawn. I'll need to leave tonight to be there in time." One day. They had one day together as husband and wife before he rode off into danger. Beatrice felt the unfairness of it like a physical ache, but she pushed it aside. She'd known this was coming, and she'd married him anyway. She wouldn't waste their precious time together with complaints. "Then we'd better make the most of today," she said with determined cheerfulness. They did exactly that. Kade taught her to ride properly, putting her on a gentle mare named Daisy and guiding her around the corral until she felt confident enough to venture farther afield. They rode out to the far edge of the property, to a spot where a small creek ran through a stand of cottonwood trees. There, they had a picnic lunch that Beatrice had packed, and Kade told her about his dreams for the ranch. "I want to build it into something that lasts," he said, lying on his back with his head in her lap while she ran her fingers through his hair. "Not just for us, but for our children and their children. I want to create a legacy, a place that means something." "We will," Beatrice assured him. "Together, we'll build something wonderful." As the sun began to set, they rode back to the ranch, knowing their time was running short. Lily had returned and tactfully busied herself with preparing a farewell dinner for Kade. The three of them ate together, keeping the conversation light and avoiding talk of the danger ahead. When it was time for Kade to leave, Beatrice walked him out to his horse. He'd packed supplies for several days, though he hoped the hunt wouldn't take that long. His rifle was secured to his saddle, his revolver cleaned and loaded. "I'll be back before you know it," he said, holding her close. "A week, maybe 2 at most, and then I'm done with this kind of thing. No more passes, no more riding off into danger, just you and me and the ranch." "I'll hold you to that." Beatrice fought to keep the tears from her voice. "Please be careful, please come back to me." "I will, I swear it." He kissed her long and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. "I love you, Beatrice Sullivan. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "I love you too, more than I can say." One more kiss, and then he swung up into the saddle. Beatrice and Lily stood in the yard and watched him ride away into the gathering darkness, and Beatrice felt as if he was taking her heart with him. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Beatrice's life. She threw herself into ranch work, desperate for anything to keep her mind occupied. She and Lily worked from dawn to dusk, tending to the animals, maintaining the property, and preparing for winter. At night, Beatrice would lie alone in the bed she'd shared so briefly with her husband and pray for his safe return. News came in bits and pieces. A traveler reported that the posse had tracked Coulter's gang into the mountains. Another said there'd been a shootout, but he didn't know who'd been hurt. Each report sent Beatrice's anxiety soaring, and only Lily's steady presence kept her from riding to Muskogee herself to demand information. On the 14th day, a rider came to the ranch. Beatrice's heart stopped when she saw it wasn't Kade, but then the man was calling out that he had news, that the posse was returning, that they'd caught the outlaws. "Is everyone all right?" Beatrice demanded. "Kade Sullivan, is he all right?" "Took a bullet to the shoulder, but he'll be fine," the rider reported. "They're bringing him back to Muskogee now. Doc Anderson is tending to him." Beatrice didn't wait to hear more. She ran for the barn, Lily right behind her. Together, they saddled horses and rode for Muskogee as if the devil himself was chasing them. The town was buzzing with excitement when they arrived, everyone talking about how the posse had cornered the outlaws in a canyon and captured them after a fierce gunfight. Beatrice found Kade in the doctor's office, his shoulder bandaged and his arm in a sling. He was pale and obviously in pain, but his face lit up when he saw her. "Beatrice," he said, and she was across the room in an instant, carefully throwing her arms around him. "You got shot," she said accusingly, torn between relief that he was alive and anger that he'd been hurt. "Just a graze," he claimed, though the doctor snorted at that characterization. "Bullet went clean through," the doctor corrected. "He's lucky it missed the bone. He'll need to keep that arm immobilized for a few weeks while it heals, and the wound will need to be cleaned and bandaged daily to prevent infection. But yes, he should make a full recovery." "I'm taking you home," Beatrice declared. "And you're going to rest and follow every single one of the doctor's orders, or so help me, Kade Sullivan, I'll shoot you myself." Despite his pain, Kade managed a weak smile. "Yes, madam." The journey back to the ranch was slow and careful, with Beatrice riding close beside Kade in case he showed signs of weakness. But he sat tall in the saddle, refusing to show how much he was hurting. By the time they arrived home, he was gray with exhaustion and pain. Beatrice helped him into bed and spent the rest of the day tending to him. She cleaned his wound as the doctor had instructed, biting her lip at his sharp intake of breath, but not wavering in her task. She made him broth and forced him to drink it, even when he claimed he wasn't hungry. She sat beside him as he drifted in and out of fevered sleep, bathing his face with cool cloths and whispering reassurances. The fever broke on the 3rd day, and Kade woke clear-eyed and more like himself. The first thing he saw was Beatrice asleep in a chair beside the bed, her hand still holding his. His heart swelled with love for this woman who'd nursed him so devotedly. "Beatrice," he said softly. She woke instantly, leaning forward. "How do you feel? Do you need water? Is the pain bad?" "I feel better, and I'm sorry for putting you through this." He squeezed her hand gently. "I promised I'd come back to you, and I did. A little worse for wear, but I'm here." "You're here," she agreed, tears slipping down her cheeks, "and you're going to be fine. And you're never joining a posse again." "Never," he promised. "From now on, my only adventure is building this ranch with you." Recovery was slow and frustrating for a man used to constant activity. Kade chafed at being confined to the house, at having to watch Beatrice and Lily do work he felt he should be doing. But Beatrice was firm, and Lily backed her up. They managed the ranch between them, and Beatrice found she was stronger than she'd thought. She could muck out stalls, haul water, even help move cattle from one pasture to another. By the time Kade was cleared by the doctor to resume light work, winter was settling in over Oklahoma. The days grew shorter and colder, and the ranch work shifted to focus on keeping the animals fed and healthy through the lean months ahead. It was a hard winter, but also a sweet one. The enforced closeness as the three of them spent long evenings around the fire brought them even closer together. Kade taught Beatrice to play cards, and she taught him and Lily some of the songs her mother used to play on the piano. They told stories, planned for the spring, and dreamed about the future. In late February, Beatrice woke feeling ill. At first, she thought it was just something she'd eaten, but when the nausea persisted morning after morning, a different possibility occurred to her. She confided in Lily, who confirmed her suspicions with barely contained excitement. "You have to tell Kade," Lily insisted. That evening, after dinner, Beatrice asked Kade to take a walk with her despite the cold. They bundled up and headed out into the clear winter night, their breath forming clouds in the air. The stars overhead were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "Is something wrong?" Kade asked, picking up on her nervous energy. "No, nothing's wrong. In fact, something's very right." She stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Kade, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her and Beatrice's heart sank. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe this was too soon. But then his face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen, and he let out a whoop that probably scared every animal on the ranch. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down, looking worried. "I'm sorry, should I not have done that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." Beatrice laughed, pure joy bubbling up inside her. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass. But yes, we're going to have a baby. Sometime in early September, I think." Kade pulled her into a gentle embrace, resting his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "Our baby. Beatrice, you've made me the happiest man alive." Again, the pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. As Beatrice's belly grew, Kade became increasingly protective, trying to take over all her chores and fussing whenever she lifted anything heavier than a spoon. She bore his concern with good-natured exasperation, knowing it came from love. In late August, Beatrice went into labor. Lily rode for the doctor while Kade stayed with his wife, holding her hand and wiping her brow and looking more terrified than he'd ever been facing down outlaws. "You can do this," he told her as she labored through a particularly hard contraction. "You're the strongest person I know. You faced down armed men. You survived being abandoned in the middle of nowhere. You can do this." And she did. After 14 hours of labor, just as the sun was rising on a beautiful September morning, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Kade cut the cord with shaking hands, and when the doctor placed the baby in Beatrice's arms, they both wept with joy. "He's perfect," Beatrice whispered, tracing her finger over the baby's tiny face. "He's absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Kade asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. "I was thinking about that," Beatrice said. "What about James, James Sullivan? It was my father's name." "James," Kade tried it out, then nodded. "James Sullivan, I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son." Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful. James was a good baby for the most part, though he had a powerful set of lungs when he wanted something. Beatrice marveled at how much she could love someone so small, how every little smile or sound he made filled her heart to bursting. And watching Kade with their son was almost as wonderful. The tough rancher became impossibly gentle when holding James, talking to him in a soft voice and making silly faces to coax out baby giggles. Lily was a devoted aunt, always willing to watch James so that Kade and Beatrice could have time together. And as James grew from a baby into a toddler, she delighted in teaching him to walk and talk, proudly claiming credit for his first words. The ranch prospered. Word had spread about the quality of Kade's cattle and horses, and buyers came from as far as Kansas and Texas. With the profits, Kade was able to expand, buying more land and building better facilities. He hired on a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, good men who treated Beatrice and Lily with respect and worked hard to earn their pay. When James was 3, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Sarah. Kade was beside himself with joy, though also slightly overwhelmed at the thought of raising 3 children. "Our family is getting bigger," he said, holding Sarah while Beatrice nursed Thomas. "We might need to expand the house." "That would be nice," Beatrice agreed. "Especially if we keep having children at this rate." They did expand the house, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch became a bustling, lively place, filled with the sounds of children playing and the constant activity of a successful operation. Lily eventually married one of the ranch hands, a good man named David who'd proven himself over 2 years of hard work. They built a house on the far edge of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough to have their own life. When Lily gave birth to her first child, a daughter, Beatrice and Kade were there to welcome their niece into the world, just as Lily had been there for all 3 of theirs. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happy moments. James grew into a serious boy much like his father, already showing an aptitude for ranching that made Kade proud. The twins were a handful, Thomas adventurous and constantly getting into trouble, Sarah quieter but with a stubborn streak a mile wide. When James was 10, Thomas and Sarah 7, Beatrice found herself pregnant one last time. She gave birth to another boy, Matthew, and declared that 4 children were quite enough. "Thank you very much." Kade readily agreed, though he secretly thought he'd have a dozen children with Beatrice if she'd wanted them. Each one was a blessing, a sign of the life they'd built together from nothing. One evening, when the children were all asleep and the ranch was quiet, Kade and Beatrice sat on the porch they'd added to the house, watching the sunset paint the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and pink. Beatrice was tucked against Kade's side, his arm around her shoulders, and they were content in the comfortable silence of people who knew each other completely. "You ever think about that day," Kade asked suddenly, "when the wagon train left you behind?" "Sometimes," Beatrice admitted. "Usually when I'm counting my blessings. If they hadn't abandoned me, I never would have met you. I'd be in California, married to William Hartley, probably running his shop and living a perfectly respectable, perfectly ordinary life. Would you have been happy?" She considered the question seriously. "Maybe, in a way, but not like this. Never like this." She gestured to the ranch spread out before them, to the house filled with their sleeping children, to everything they'd built together. "This is real happiness, Kade. The kind that comes from choosing the right person and building a life with them day by day, year by year. The kind that survives hard times and celebrates good ones. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Not even for California and a shopkeeper who could have given you an easier life. Especially not for that." She turned in his arms to look at him. "You gave me everything I ever really wanted, even though I didn't know what that was when you found me. A home, a family, work that matters, and love. So much love. More than I ever dreamed possible." Kade kissed her soft and sweet, a kiss that held years of love and partnership and shared dreams. "I'm the lucky one. You could have gone anywhere, done anything, but you chose to stay here with me. You chose this life." "I chose you," Beatrice corrected, "and I'd choose you again in a heartbeat. Every single day, I'd choose you." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Inside, one of the children called out in their sleep, and Beatrice reluctantly stood to go check on them. But before she went inside, she looked back at her husband, at the ranch they'd built, at the life they'd created from a chance encounter on an empty prairie. She thought about that frightened, alone woman standing in the dust, watching her last hope disappear over the horizon. That woman had thought her life was over, but really, it had been just beginning. All it had taken was a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart saying 3 simple words: You're coming with me." Those words had changed everything. They'd led to this moment, to this life, to this overwhelming sense of contentment and belonging. Beatrice sent up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever divine providence had arranged for her abandonment, for Kade's timely arrival, for every small decision and chance occurrence that had brought them together. Then she went inside to check on her children, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, she and Kade would face it together. Just as they always had. Just as they always would, the children grew as children do. James took to ranching like he was born to it, often riding out with his father at dawn and returning at dusk, full of stories about cattle and horses and the endless work of maintaining a successful ranch. Thomas proved to be more interested in books than livestock, and Beatrice delighted in teaching him everything she could, supplementing his education with books ordered from back east. Sarah had a gift with horses, able to calm even the most skittish animal with her gentle touch and soft voice. And Matthew, the baby, seemed to have inherited both his mother's stubbornness and his father's work ethic, a combination that promised great things. Lily's family grew too, until she had 4 children of her own running around with Kade and Beatrice's brood. The ranch became a true family enterprise, with everyone pitching in according to their abilities. Holidays were loud, chaotic affairs with children everywhere and enough food to feed a small army. As the children grew older and more capable, Kade and Beatrice found themselves with a bit more time to themselves. They took walks in the evening, just as they had when they were newlyweds, talking about their day and making plans for the future. The ranch was thriving beyond their wildest dreams, producing some of the finest cattle and horses in Oklahoma. They'd earned the respect of their neighbors and the loyalty of their employees. They'd built something solid, something lasting. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kade surprised Beatrice with a trip to Kansas City. It was the first time either of them had left the ranch for more than a day since they'd married, and Lily insisted they go, promising to watch the children and manage things in their absence. Kansas City was overwhelming after so many years in rural Oklahoma. The noise, the crowds, the sheer number of buildings and people all crammed together made Beatrice dizzy. But it was also exciting. Kade took her to a real restaurant, where someone else did the cooking and serving. They went to a theater and saw a play, something Beatrice hadn't done since she was a girl. They stayed in a hotel with electric lights and indoor plumbing, marvels of modern convenience that made them both laugh at how far they'd come. But the best part of the trip was simply being together without the constant demands of ranch life and children. They talked for hours, remembering their early days together, laughing about the challenges they'd faced and overcome. They made love without worrying about quiet or interruption. They dreamed about the future, about watching their grandchildren grow up on the ranch they'd built. "I never told you this," Kade said one night as they lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed, "but I was scared to death the day I found you." "Scared of what?" "Of you." "Of what I felt the moment I saw you." He pulled her closer. "I'd convinced myself I didn't have time for love, that building the ranch had to come first. And then there you were, looking lost and defiant and beautiful, and I knew my nice, simple plans were about to get very complicated." "Was I worth the complication?" Beatrice asked teasingly. "Every second of it. Every sleepless night when the babies were crying, every hard winter when money was tight, every moment of fear and uncertainty. All of it was worth it because I got to spend it with you." He kissed her forehead. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice. You and our children. This life we've built. I wake up every morning grateful that Harvey Benson was heartless enough to leave you behind, because if he hadn't, I never would have found you." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. After 20 years of marriage, 4 children, and countless challenges faced and overcome together, he could still make her cry with his words. "I love you, Kade Sullivan. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. That's my promise to you." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to dive back into the beautiful chaos of their life. The children mobbed them at the door, all talking at once about everything that had happened while they were gone. Lily looked exhausted but happy, and she shooed them all away so Kade and Beatrice could settle back in. The years continued to pass. James met a young woman from a neighboring ranch and fell in love with the same quiet intensity his father had. Kade and Beatrice gave them their blessing, and the wedding was a grand affair that brought together families from all over the territory. Oklahoma had become a state in 1907, and the ranch was now part of a growing, changing place that was finding its identity. Thomas surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to go back east to university. It was hard to let him go, but Kade and Beatrice supported his dreams, just as their parents had supported theirs. He wrote long letters home about his studies, about the modern ideas he was learning, about his plans to become a teacher and bring better education to Oklahoma. Sarah married a veterinarian who came to the ranch to treat a sick horse and stayed to court her. They set up practice in Muskogee, and Sarah helped him build a thriving business treating the animals throughout the region. Matthew was still young, but already showing signs of being the one to eventually take over the ranch from his father. Kade and Beatrice became grandparents and then grandparents several times over. The ranch that had started with just Kade and Lily was now home to multiple generations of family, all working together to build something that would outlast them all. They bought more land, built more buildings, expanded their operations. But the heart of it remained the same: family, hard work, and the love that had started it all. One summer evening, when Kade was 62 and Beatrice 58, they took their customary walk to watch the sunset. They moved slower now, their joints stiff with age and hard work, but they still found joy in these quiet moments together. "Look at all this," Beatrice said, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them. "Look at what we built." "What we built together," Kade corrected. He'd gone gray, and his face was weathered with age, but his eyes still held the same warmth they'd had the day he'd pulled her onto his horse all those years ago. "Together," Beatrice agreed. "Always together." They stood hand in hand as the sun set over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold. The same prairie where Beatrice had once stood alone and afraid, certain her life was over. The same land where Kade had ridden up and changed everything with a simple offer. "You're coming with me." She'd come with him, and together they'd built a life beyond anything either of them could have imagined. A life full of love and laughter, challenges and triumphs, children and grandchildren, and the deep satisfaction of work well done. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Kade and Beatrice turned to walk back to the house they'd built together, filled with the family they'd created. Their hands remained clasped, fingers intertwined as they'd been for 40 years. And in that simple gesture was everything: love, partnership, commitment, and the unbreakable bond forged between two people who'd chosen each other and built a life on that choice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as tomorrow always did. But tomorrow would also bring new joys, new moments to treasure, new reasons to be grateful for the life they shared. And whatever came, they'd face it as they always had, together, hand in hand, heart to heart, building their legacy one day at a time. The story that had begun with abandonment and rescue had become a love story for the ages. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was easy, but because they'd worked for it every single day. And not because fate had brought them together, but because they'd both had the courage to choose love when it appeared in the most unlikely of circumstances. As they reached the porch, their youngest grandson came running out to greet them, full of excitement about a new colt born that afternoon. They listened to his chatter with the patience of people who'd learned that these moments were precious, that childhood passed in the blink of an eye, that every generation was both an ending and a beginning. Inside, the house was warm and bright with lamplight. The dinner table was set for the whole extended family, as it was most nights. Voices called out greetings as Kade and Beatrice entered, and they were swept up in the loving chaos of their big, boisterous family. This was their legacy, Beatrice thought as she helped set out the food and listened to the overlapping conversations around her. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings they'd constructed, but this, family, love, the sense of belonging that every person around this table felt. They'd created a place where people were valued, where hard work was respected, where love was the foundation of everything. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and the younger children put to bed, Beatrice and Kade finally made their way to their own room. They got ready for bed with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd shared a life for decades, and when they finally lay down together, Kade pulled Beatrice close the way he had every night since they'd married. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what? For staying. For choosing me. For building this life with me. For 40 years of love and partnership. For our children and grandchildren. For everything." Beatrice turned in his arms to kiss him softly. "Thank you for saying you're coming with me. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. Thank you for loving me, for building this with me, for giving me a family and a home and a purpose. Thank you for every single day we've had together." They fell asleep as they always did, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for what they had and excited for what was yet to come. And if either of them dreamed that night, it was of that first meeting on an empty prairie, of a chance encounter that had changed both their lives, of the moment when a lost woman and a kind cowboy had found each other and decided to face the future together. It was a story they'd told many times over the years, to their children and grandchildren, to friends and neighbors. The story of how Beatrice Vaughn had been left behind by her wagon train and how Kade Sullivan had found her and brought her home. How she'd faced down outlaws to protect him, how he'd been wounded and she'd nursed him back to health. How they'd married in a simple ceremony and built a ranch and a family that would last for generations. But the real story, the one that couldn't be told in simple words, was the story of their love. A love that had started as attraction and grown into partnership. A love that had weathered every storm and celebrated every triumph. A love that had deepened with each passing year, becoming richer and more complex, and more essential to who they were. It was the kind of love that only came from choosing each other every single day, from working side by side toward common goals, from raising children together and building dreams into reality. It was the kind of love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, living on in the family they'd created and the legacy they'd built. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the family gathered, when the Oklahoma sky turned brilliant shades of purple and gold and the first stars began to appear, you could still see them. Kade and Beatrice Sullivan, hand in hand, watching the sunset over the land they'd built together. Still in love after all these years. Still grateful for the day a wagon train left a woman behind, and a cowboy said the words that would change both their lives forever. "You're coming with me." Those 5 words had led to a lifetime of love, a legacy of family, and a story that would be told for generations to come. A story that proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the beginning of our greatest blessings, that being left behind can lead to being found. And that real love, the kind that lasts, is built one day at a time by people brave enough to choose it and work for it and protect it with everything they have. This was their story. This was their legacy. And long after they were gone, when their great-grandchildren walked the land they'd claimed and built and nurtured, the story would remain. The story of Beatrice and Kade, of a love that started with 5 simple words and lasted a lifetime. A love that proved that happy endings weren't just for fairy tales, but for real people brave enough to seize the chances life offered them and build something beautiful from the ashes of what might have been a tragedy. The end of their story was really just the beginning of another, as the ranch passed to the next generation and the next, each one adding their own chapter to the family legacy. But at the heart of it all, at the foundation of everything that came after, was that moment on an empty Oklahoma prairie when a frightened woman and a kind cowboy made a choice that would echo through the generations. She'd been left behind by the wagon train. He'd said, "You're coming with me." And together, they'd built a love story for the ages.